Hey guys, it's me again with another review. This time it's of UFC Forrest Griffin, The Ultimate Fighter. And the documentary is only about an hour and 5 minutes long, but it's long enough. But to me, it's detailed, but I get annoyed when, I don't know the point, when they basically show what you want to see, but you don't want to see it. Do you get what I mean? Like, Forrest Griffin's a fighter. So you want to see like fighting because it's the UFC. But if you've got the fights already on the second disc, you don't need like 8, 9 matches to kind of fill up the documentary. If you know what I mean. So basically, what happens is you start out and it tells you him as a boy, and he says basically how his dad moved, so he didn't really have a close relationship with him. And basically his mum ended up dating other men, obviously, and he ended up with a stepdad. And his stepdad, who basically helped bring him up, and basically he had a good relationship with his stepdad and his mum. So then you kind of hear his mum talk about how he was one of those kids who could never stop moving, and how he was always worried he was going to become a professional wrestler because MMA didn't exist when he was a kid. And the stepdad basically says about how right she knew her son. And it's true, she did. Well, later on, he talks on about how, as a kid, he wanted to basically get people to like him. And he went to the University of Georgia and played football, American football. And he worked at the University of Georgia Police Department. And he also tried to be a nurse. So, it's pretty good. It's quite interesting hearing that. And then it goes to him being on the Ultimate Fighter. Now, this Ultimate Fighter segment takes about, I'd say, 5-10 minutes. It's kind of interesting because if you've watched the first Ultimate Fighter, Series 1, you'll know there was some real good talent in there. Like Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner, Nate Quarry, Chris Lieben, and so forth. And it was a really good season. You had Chuck Liddell and you had Randy Couture as the two basically team leaders, the coaches. And it was one of those make or break things for the UFC. They'd put so much money into the Ultimate Fighter, if they hadn't pulled off, they probably wouldn't be around now. I know it sounds funny, but if you watch the documentary, which is 20 years fighting for a generation, 20 years in the UFC, they talk all about that, and I'll be reviewing that soon. But anyway, so basically Forrest Griffin says that he had to be convinced to go because he wasn't sure. And the only way he could go was to think that you'd rather regret something you do than something you didn't do. So it goes through the matches and who he went against, and then it ends up to the Stephen Bonner match, where everybody who knows UFC knows that was like one of the biggest highlights of the UFC history. And made probably modern day UFC. Before, you had like before John Jones, before people like Cain Velasquez, you had people like, well, in the UFC anyway, you had people like Josh Koscheck, people like Kenny Florian, people like Stephen Bonner, people like Forrest Griffin, who were, on the Ultimate Fighter. So the Stephen Bonner fight and Forrest Griffin shown in quite large clips, and you've got Stephen Bonner and you've got Forrest Griffin both talking about it. They're both talking about how tired they were, how gassed they were. They both put their whole body and soul into it, and you can tell because it's one of those all-out raw matches where they just punch each other and there's no stopping, and it's amazing. I highly recommend watching the first season of Ultimate Fighter just to see that in the finale, to be honest. It's a very entertaining season anyway. So then it goes to his career when he got into the UFC straight after. And each one of his matches are listed, like his matches with Bill Mahood, who he beat, Elvis Sinasek, who he beat. Then it goes to Tito Ortiz, who beat him, and so forth. And you get kind of like Shogun Hua, and you get Rashad Evans beating him for the title because he beat Quinton. He beat Quinton for the light heavyweight title, and then he got beaten by Rashad Evans. Then Rashad Evans got beaten by Lyoto Machida. So it's actually quite funny because in that period there was like 3 champions at each pay-per-view getting changed over, which was quite disappointing really because you always like a long run. But anyway, so it basically goes to that. Then he goes on about how his daughter, basically he's proud of his daughter and all this, and now he ended up being on the Ultimate Fighter Series 7 against Quinton Rampage, and that was basically the fight they had, the thing they had, like what became a routine now. But if you're 2 coaches on the Ultimate Fighter, you end up fighting either at the finale or at your own pay-per-view. Thus, that's how Forrest Griffin won the title from Quinton, because he got that title shot. And then he goes on about how he lost the title basically and how upset he was, and then you get the Tito 2 and you get the Mauricio Shogun 2 and you get the Tito Ortiz 3. And the thing that really annoys me is that all this is basically said by Forrest, and you get the odd bit from Dana White, but you kind of feel like if they'd have had people like Tito Ortiz doing a bit of the talking about the matches, or Quentin, or Anderson Silva even, because there is that one on there, even though it's not really a match, it's a decimation, you feel like it would have been more of a documentary with some more feeling, because you find that Forrest Griffin's a very likeable guy, and he's very fun to watch, and he does make you laugh a few times, because he's that kind of bloke. You feel like if you just went to him at an autograph sign, you'd be laughing and talking to him for hours if you had the chance. So it's nice to see that. And then near the end, you get to see his daughter and his wife, and he talks about how he met Jamie, and he met her basically at gym, and how he said she said somebody who said, "Are you training for Mount Everest or something?" And they end up getting close and all this stuff. He goes on about how he stalked her basically by waiting 3 hours for her and all this other stuff, and it's really funny. And he goes on about his daughter looks like him, and if she grows old and she doesn't want to look like him, he will get her a nose job and all this stuff. And it's quite funny. And then he basically talks about his #1 best-selling book, which was, I think, New York Times #1. I think he said that. And he said basically how he goes looking at other books and steals ideas from them, but makes them into his own with his own story. But he doesn't really do much of it. So the whole documentary isn't bad. It's just that there's more of the highlights from the matches in it than there is more about Forrest. Like I'd like to know more of him as a child, more of him as a teenager, more of how his life is. And I would like to, kind of like the Ronda Rousey one, I would have liked to be more tightly knit, more in, and not so all over the place. Because it's a great documentary, don't get me wrong. But if you've got all the matches on the basically disc anyway, or on the second disc, they should just give you little clips and then make it more about the character. Because one of the things I would have liked, and they didn't show it much, was the training. They go on about how he trains hard, he trains 3 times a day at 3 different gyms. I would like to have seen more of that. I would like to have seen more of his training partners talking about him and so forth, you know. So overall, I'd give it a 3.5 because I felt like I was missing a lot of stuff that could have made it better. But then that's the usual UFC documentary. They're not all tightly knit like the Ronda Rousey one. The Benson Henderson one wasn't as good either. So this was better than that one, though. So I recommend giving it a watch if you're a hardcore UFC fan, or even if you're a Forrest Griffin fan. I recommend giving it a watch and, you know, have fun and enjoy the matches. The point is the matches, or the fights I should say, are all on normal UFC DVDs anyway, so you don't really need it for that anyway. So, unlike the Benson Henderson one where you had the WEC matches which you can't buy on DVD, it's one pirated, it's not really one of those ones you really need unless you want to see the documentary. So anyway, enough of me rambling. So as always guys, thanks for watching and have a lovely day. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and take care.